All right, welcome back to What Can Brown Jazz Vinyl. Quick note, just in the past week or so, YouTube opened up the possibility to actually name your, I don't know, I guess URL sort of, I mean, it's kind of a handle, but it's not, right? Because it's What Can Brown Jazz Vinyl or whatever I call this thing. But youtube.com/, YouTube has opened up the possibility of actually naming your own, like coming up with your own URL. And fortunately for me, I was able to get Jazz Vinyl Collector. So if What Cam Brown doesn't mean anything to you, because it's kind of a relic of my Instagram name as well as my employer, then you can remember me by youtube.com/ at Jazz Vinyl Collector. So anyway, there's that. We're about to jump into a shootout of this Bobby Hutcherson album that Tone Poet just put out last Friday. Before we get into it, hit the subscribe button. I would appreciate it. So let's jump in. Stick Up by Bobby Hutcherson. Again, this came out last Friday. I like to take a couple of days to sort of digest the music and also kind of spend time listening to the original as well before I get into these types of things. And I've done that, and I do have some thoughts on this album. And here's the thing. One thing I'm going to say up front. I said in a prior video, I can't remember if it was Blue Train or if it was the Kenny Burrell mono release that Tone Poet put out somewhat recently. But one of the comments that I said is that I don't buy Tone Poet editions of records if I already have the original pressing, and if that original pressing came out in its like sort of chronological order, like it came out at the time, like somewhere around the time of the original recording. And there's been now several exceptions, right? So there was Blue Train, there was that Kenny Burrell record. I did end up picking up Katanga, the Curtis Amy record. It's funny, I haven't done a shootout of this yet, or I guess I won't because I already sold my original. But I had this like red vinyl original on Pacific Jazz of Katanga, and as soon as I heard the Tone Poet, I was like, I am never listening to this original pressing again, because the Tone Poet just destroyed it. Like it was such a good pressing, and I figured you can't why own multiple copies of stuff if you're not going to listen to them and that kind of thing. So anyway, all of that baggage that I have, right, going into Stick Up, I have an original pressing of this. This is one of the sort of early Blue Notes that I probably picked up, and I've upgraded it a few times, to be fair. Probably most recently in 2020 with this like collection buy, but I've never found any faults with it. It is an interesting album, I suppose, in that as much as it was released sort of, it wasn't released in chronology, really. It was recorded in 66. It didn't come out until 68. And so 2 years in the grand scheme of like Blue Note is basically nothing. There was plenty of sessions that were sort of shelved for like a year or two before they were released. But at the same time, the fact that this came out in 68, it is a little apparent, just because I feel like Hutcherson was kind of really going more into the sort of post-bop thing. And there are some relics of hard bop on this album in addition to post-bop, but for the most part, it's well within where it should be in terms of how it sounds. Anyway, I decided to pick this up, and the main reason is because Bobby Hutcherson, is just phenomenal musician. I mean, I don't know how well he was received in his day, like when this music was coming out, but in retrospect, I mean, between him and Joe Henderson, who's also on this album, and a couple of other folks for Blue Note, it just feels like their music really, really, I don't know, has either grown on me personally, or it's just sort of grown in the general sort of public consciousness, and it feels like a lot more people are appreciating his music. So I had to get this one. Also, the other thing about Hutcherson, when I was in college, I played trumpet. I was in like a jazz band, like for school, and then I also kind of did some extracurricular bands playing trumpet. And Bobby Hutcherson came to visit campus because he was good friends with my professor, Jay Hogard. And Jay Hogard is a vibraphonist, still playing and still killing it. And Hutcherson came and he played a show and he invited this orchestra that Jay conducted and led to play with him. And so we had the opportunity to go on stage and play some tracks, and we're playing some standards. I'm sure I can't remember exactly what we were playing, but Hutcherson played with us, and he took some solos and stuff, and it was pretty amazing just to share the stage with such an amazing musician and to kind of have a little bit deeper connection. And so I'm always looking out for anything that comes out that Hutcherson led or is on. And so here we are. I ended up picking up this one, and this is now my, I guess, fourth tone poet that I already have the original of. And here we are. But I'm excited. I was excited to grab this, excited to talk about it. So let's dive right in.
All right, so Stick Up. Putting this in the sort of chronology of Bobby Hutcherson's discography, Stick Up, like I said, was released in 1968, thus the sort of Liberty era pressing of this thing. And it actually was recorded right in between Happenings, which is a great album, and Oblique. And Oblique was one of those records that Tone Poet also put out, right? So 1966 was when it was recorded. It was recorded in between these two things, but didn't come out until 1968. Couple of things otherwise about this that I think is interesting. So one is that this is the first album that Hutcherson recorded for Blue Note without Joe Chambers on drums. Not only isn't he on drums, but he also didn't contribute any compositions to this, which I suppose makes sense if he wasn't on the recording. But it's interesting because every other Hutcherson album had Joe Chambers on drums, and we don't have that here. We have Billy Higgins. So obviously, no problems. But it's kind of interesting because it seems like the two kind of work together quite a bit. So I guess what else about this? Interestingly enough, Bobby Hutcherson, even though it doesn't seem like he was like, I would say, squarely a Blue Note musician, maybe that's because of his later career. But interestingly enough, Hutcherson had the second longest recording career with Blue Note out of any musician. And that was from 1963 until 1977. So that was quite the long period of time. So if you think about some of these, some of the records like Head On and stuff that, into the 70s, he had been recording for Blue Note for quite some time. The only other musician who eclipsed him was not Jimmy Smith, even though Jimmy Smith probably had the most albums out of any of these musicians. But it was Horace Silver who had a longer career for Blue Note. All right, so let's dive right into the music. And again, this is the original pressing, and me coming up with some of these thoughts. I had not only listened to the original, but I listened to the Tone Poet. And so, as usual, most of my comments are going to be in relationship with the Tone Poet. And it's hard to break those things apart, right? Because I wouldn't have much commentary just listening to the original. I mean, it's a great recording, it's great music, and I'd probably say this is good. But when you do have a new edition, you can kind of start making comparisons. So what I would say with the original pressing, firstly, and this is also just generally about the music, is that it very much has that kind of 60s feel in terms of how it was recorded, and especially that opener, the opening track of this album, which was composed by Ornette Coleman. Actually, the only track on this album that was not composed by Bobby Hutcherson, and that track is called. It's in Spanish, and I'm not never took a single lesson, but I believe it's Una Muy Bonita. That's probably roundabout anyway, how it's pronounced, but forgive my ignorance. So that track, I would say, it's kind of a Latin feel. It's a fun track. It feels like what you'd expect from like an opener on a Blue Note album of this era. And what I mean by that, some of the context is that they really seem to want to put forward the catchiest track up front. with a lot of these, probably ever since Lee Morgan's Sidewinder. They really were trying to, they sort of got a taste for success, and so they really were trying to put the singles up front. Interestingly enough, an Ornette Coleman composition being equated with a single is a little funny. But it's a great track, kind of has a funky feel, but like I said, it's also Latin, and it's great. In terms of how the musicians are sort of staged, you have Joe Henderson, who's very much in the left channel, and he sounds great, right? In some ways, when he's playing, it just feels like it could be a Joe Henderson album. He sort of has a hard edge to his tone, which is probably standard across some of his other tracks as well. In terms of the other instruments, I mean, Hutcherson is going to be in the center because he's the leader, and he sounds good. I mean, he sounds great. Like, I don't want to say that he doesn't sound great. There's not as much, I would say, sonic detail or like that you could that I feel like you could get with vibes, perhaps with sustains, but it's not a breath thing, right? So there's not going to be this sort of like the attacks, are not going to be as detailed as say the attacks on a tenor saxophone. And so in any event, he does sound good. The bass is actually quite muffled, I would say, in this recording overall. And I would also say that the drums are relatively one-dimensional. And I don't know if they put less priority perhaps on the original pressing with the rhythm section when you consider that the vibes needs to sort of break through some of this and is not not the loudest instrument perhaps, but it feels like there's just no sonic detail to the drums whatsoever, and again the bass is like very much muffled, so that's a little bit disappointing, but Hutcherson sounds great, Henderson sounds great. Track 2, I would say, is the highlight of the entire album. It is called 8/4 Beat. And this is one of those tracks that it is very much more in that sort of post-bop feel. So if the first one felt 60s and I don't want to say campy, but just like a little pop, right? 8/4 Beat is much more what I would associate Hutcherson with. Much more sort of heady, kind of music, almost like a modal feel to it. And it's just a fantastic track. I would say that the particular highlights here are Hutcherson's solo, which is just really nice, and then McCoy Tyner has a really great solo. I mean, I think that his best work on this album is this solo in 8/4 Beat. And like I said, it's got to be my favorite track on the album. To finish off the first side, there is a ballad, which is pretty nice. The Billy Higgins sticks to brushes on this track, so it's really like just kind of like a relaxed sort of ballad, and it's good. I mean, I would say, I mean, the track is, the music is great, but I just wish that Higgins' brushwork was perhaps a little bit more pronounced. It's just so soft. And I mean, but it is what it is. It's, I would say this. The album is great. It fits well within Bobby Hutcherson's discography. If you like Bobby Hutcherson, if you like Oblique, if you like The Kicker, right? If you like Happenings, Components, some of these other albums, you're gonna like this. I mean, it's more of that, and it's a great album. And I think that the original pressing overall is a great listen. I mean, it's all I've had to listen to, right, for the last probably 10 or so years when I first bought the album, and I've never had any real complaints.
All right, let's jump right into the Tone Poet. Here it is in all its glory, gatefold, hype sticker, everything like that. By the way, did you ever notice like every single hype sticker is exactly the same in these things? Some people that like spend a lot of time thinking about how to preserve hype stickers and stuff. It's the exact same one on every single Tone Poet, as far as I can tell. I'm not a hype sticker person, if you can't tell. So let's talk about what you get that's different than the original, right? And it turns out there is a lot, and not to sound like a broken record, but the biggest takeaway from this album is an exceptional amount of detail in the music that you don't get on the original. And so let's see if I can kind of break that down. So more dynamic, but more specifically, I can tell right from the beginning, the kick drum I've never talked about the kick drum in any of these in any of these shootouts. The kick drum is definitely punchier. I didn't even notice it. I'm sure it was there on the original. I'm sure I heard it, but I didn't really notice it. It didn't like jump out to me. And on this Tone Poet pressing, it definitely does. So what else? So this was really interesting. Talk about things that you didn't notice in the original, and then they become apparent. So in the opener, Hutcherson is soloing, and Joe Henderson is doing these like really subtle kind of like accents, like while he's soloing, he's like kind of like comping behind him. Didn't even notice it on the original. Like I'm sure now if I went back, I'd hear a little bit of it, but like all of a sudden listening to the Tone Poet, I'm hearing Joe Henderson like doodle in the background. It's like really, really interesting that he's like playing this like soft sort of stuff that I just didn't notice whatsoever on the original pressing. So I thought that was kind of exciting. It's always interesting to be able to hear new stuff when you when you get to hear sort of new editions of some of these records. The other thing that I found interesting is that I think Bobby Hutcherson sings a little bit his solo, kind of common with vibraphone players, and I don't really get it. And obviously there's some piano players, right, who sing what they are playing. Generally speaking, I don't like it. I don't like the distraction. I'd rather the music just be the music. And I don't know whether, some of these artists are singing for the audience's benefit or if it's for their own, because it's like you're following kind of their sort of cerebral process and how they translate what's going on in their head to their hands, right? In this case with Hutcherson. But generally speaking, I don't like it when vibraphonists sing. And Hutcherson, I believe, does. I think that's who I'm hearing sing. I don't know who else it would be. But it's not so pronounced. It's not like a Dave Pike record where it's like half the what's audible is him singing and the other half is his vibes. It is like kind of subdued, but it's there. Didn't notice it on the original, and you notice it here. I mean, this is like the whole thing with these Tone Poets, right? Is that they're supposedly more accurately reproducing what that original master recording sounded like, and so this is what we have, right? Like this was less representative of the original, and this is more representative of the original. At least that's the idea, and that probably is the case here. Joe Henderson, who I mentioned when I spoke about the original, he's in the left channel, much more detailed. It's significant. There's more nuance with his attacks as he plays. On 8/4 beat, I would say that as much as Henderson kind of has a little bit of a sort of aggressive tone, it isn't that he's more aggressive here. That's not where the detail is. It's actually more in the subtleness of his playing, I think. And that's really exciting, because anybody can just play louder, like sharper or whatever, like, have like, more aggressive attacks. But I feel like a lot of the nuance is what they brought out. I say they brought out, but what was present on the original master recording that they were able to put in this edition, and it's really exciting. The drums are definitely more apparent across the board here. Especially the cymbal work, and that's not going to be it's not going to be groundbreaking news to anybody who's familiar with the Tone Poet series. I tend to like how the drums and specifically the cymbals sound on Tone Poets in the Tone Poet series. So no complaints here, especially when you consider what I said about the original pressing, in that the drums were kind of not as detailed and a little bit more pushed to the back. So the fact that they're brought more forward, actually, I think it isn't that they're forward. It's just that it's better balanced. It's a better balanced sound on this pressing. So Bobby Hutcherson, I would say that there's less apparent improvement between these two pressings. I do think that his vibes ring more. So it isn't about the attack, but kind of the sustains a little bit. I think there is more there. It's more of like a trail. And so therefore probably there's also more detail around the sort of dynamics, right, of how he plays in terms of volume, and so that's good. But generally speaking, I would say the biggest improvements here are drums and Joe Henderson's tenor, which, like I said, I think the result of this is that it just ends up creating a much better balance overall across all the musicians. So the last track that I'll mention is that last track on side one, which is the ballad. And I mentioned on the original pressing that, you know, it was good, but that it wasn't that interesting. It's not that it isn't that interesting. It's just like from a sonic perspective, like there's not as much to like kind of focus your attention on. It's a beautiful ballad, and it's executed very well. But in comparison, on this tone poet, it's just much more detailed. And so even in such a soft ballad, it's nice that they were able to capture, I guess, more of the detail and the subtleness, I think. And maybe in some ways, you know, that's the measure of like a great, you know, audiophile recording is not, you know, not the leader, you know, a trumpeter, you know, playing a solo who's like front and center and above everybody else, but it's kind of like creating that balance, creating more of like a representative feel of maybe how the band sounded, or at least wanted to sound. I don't think that I left it up for interpretation here. To me, the Tone Poet does sound better than the original, and guess what? You can get the Tone Poet for much cheaper than the original, as is pretty common. So yeah, that's where we are. I mean, it's another great addition. It's another reminder to me that I probably should be rethinking this idea that I don't buy every Tone Poet if I have the original, because more and more these tone poets are just I don't want to say surprising me at this point. They're delivering right on my expectations that they are going to sound better, and that is the case here. And again, you know, Bobby Hutcherson is just one of those artists who, you know, hopefully I can't remember what other albums that there might be sort of in the vault or that weren't recorded or released originally, but as much of his work I think that they can find and bring forward, I think we'd all appreciate it and all be lining up to buy it, or at least I would. So yeah, there we have it. Thanks for tuning in yet again for a shootout. Please go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.